Everybody, it's Tom, and I wanted to come to you this week to talk about a notion that I encountered last week, actually, vis-a-vis an allusion on Act Out's episode, the notion of the solidarity of the shattered, or as it's sometimes put, the community of the shattered. This concept originates, essentially, with a Czech thinker by the name of Jan Patočka. That's Patocké with an inverted caret on top of the C, indicating that it's ch as opposed to s or k. So that's Patočka, if I'm saying it correctly. In any event, I had not really heard of him, but a significant portion of his celebrity, if you like, derives from his involvement in what was known as the Charter 77 movement, with which also Václav Havel, of whom you may have heard for playing a significant role in Czechoslovakian and Czech, by extension, Czech history, was also included. The Charter 77 movement was a document that a group of people signed a document which was exhorting the government of Czechoslovakia, which at the time was constituted to be a single party system, the party in question being the Communist Party, and was liable to, unfortunately, very repressive measures that, it was a point of Charter 77 to counter. By appeal both actually to the Czechoslovakian constitution itself and also certain treaties and accords that Czechoslovakia had signed. The emergence and circulation of the document was met with harsh repression and was formally illegal. And Jan Patočka was one of the signatories and himself actually ended up dying of a cerebral hemorrhage in police custody, essentially for his involvement with this movement. And that all transpired in the late 70s, early 80s. Actually, it was one of the only moments in Patočka's life, or it was only really toward the end of his life that he became sort of explicitly involved in that sort of political process, though there was a current within his thought of political concern. On the surface, the scholarship in which he was involved at the outset was the ancient world, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. There's also a medieval figure well, he's not quite medieval, because he's actually, I guess, approximately contemporary with Descartes, my apologies, but a fellow by the name of Comenius, and he was, if I'm saying that correctly, he was a significant scholar of his work, which arguably presents a counter or an alternative tact to that of Descartes regarding the problems that arise as to the relationship between modern science, its aspirations toward objectivity, and subjectivity. It's a theme that runs through the whole of his writings, right? And then beyond that, he was a student of Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger, and some would argue attempts to mediate the tension between the two, with Husserl representing, if you like, a sort of rationalist predilection, the notion that the human subjectivity can enter into the world in a manner that can be grounded by something like the rational. Whereas in the case of the Heideggerian dispensation, the inflection is upon the inscrutability of the real and the manner in which at times we feel ourselves simply thrown in an arbitrary manner into the context of our existence. That's a very rough sketch, right? feel like it's, there's an antinomy going on there. Patočka, taking both of these approaches very seriously, starts to wend toward the idea that you can open a space philosophically for an asubjective or transsubjective orientation, which can bring into focus how these two terms cannot necessarily be reconciled, but can be seen as mutually existing. What, by the way, does any of this have to do with the concept of the community or solidarity with the shaken? Well, in a parallel with Patočka's intellectual developments and researches, which are of an extraordinary depth and sufficient merit that I'm going to return to them in a future video once I've had more time to really assimilate them more appropriately or more correctly. He's dealing with a period of history marked by incredible turmoil, the world wars, then Soviet occupation, and problematic political arrangements, turmoil, strife, all the rest of it. And so there's actually a conversation, a current, between these two different aspects of his life. And in one of his latter works, which sort of reflects upon this and reflects upon the significance of history, you begin to see what he has taken from that conversation. The notion of the solidarity of the shaken comes directly from that point, where the travail, the strife, the turmoil of the 20th century in effect illuminates the inadequacy of ideology to realizing a human life. Because the ideology, and I'm not using strictly his language, but this is the gist, serves to actually close us off from real encounter. And that closing off is then generative of the violence that becomes so tragically conspicuous. There's a sort of paradox, though, that occurs, because that production of violence can then serve to dissolve the allure of the ideological and create a space for a more effective human solidarity, which allows for movement forward. That does not, by the way, entail a rejection of the rational, but on the contrary, actually realizes that true rationality must allow for openness as a condition for its operation, and perhaps also a recognition of something which transcends its terms. Now, here we can go in a few different directions, but I think that the main thing is to reconnect, despite the abstract quality of the language here, with the very visceral insight that involvement within the concrete interactions we have with each other, both immediately and at a distance, that involvement with contact with the human has the consequence of empathy and compassion. And the consequence of empathy and compassion is that there is no longer a willingness to cooperate with the terms and structures and maladept relationships and ways of seeing the world which have given rise to the tragedy of violence and suffering in the first place. Uh, and, in, and it is that empathy and compassion which produces the solidarity of the shaken, and with the shaken, those other people who have also, you know, experienced the fallout from violence, right? Um, and it's not, and it's an empathy and a compassion which drives us to act concretely and historically. Now, what does that mean to act historically? To act historically is to acknowledge a responsibility that isn't really possible if we see the universe as just so many atoms in the void, or an abstract structure with which we, relate arbitrarily. It is to take seriously the idea that the story which is forged from our action in the world actually counts to redeem the universe as meaningful. And one could go on at considerable length from that point of departure. I was actually astounded at the depth of the concept and all the other questions and issues to which it relates, So I may return to it in Patocka more generally in future videos. But I just wanted to sort of put that out there as an acknowledgement of its significance, and as something which we should perhaps allow to sort of sit and to marinate in our own reflections. So anyway, this has been Tom this week with a little bit about the notion of the community or the solidarity of the shaken. And I'll catch you guys later. Ciao.